I want to bring in Kevin Freeman. He's been on our program several times. I think he is wildly credible. He's was on the episode of For the Record of Unrestricted Warfare, which he explained the impending threat of a terrorist attack on the United States, not by an act of violence, but a cyber-economic attack. It happened in 2008, he believes. I do as well. The U.S. is currently doing absolutely nothing, and we're a sitting duck for our enemies. Watch For the Record on demand, and make sure you watch the new season of For the Record, premiering February 12th at 8 p.m. Kevin is also the author of a new book called Game Plan, How to Protect Yourself from the Coming Cyber Economic Attack. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you.
I will tell you that we are sitting here talking about the polar vortex, and I think there is a vortex on the economy that no one is really talking about. Between what happened with the new head of the Fed yesterday, more printing that will absolutely be a part of the plan, the house of cards that is the United States, and you say cyber-terrorism.
Right. In fact, we've spent, I don't know how many billions of dollars fighting this fake global warming issue, and we've done virtually nothing. Even though General Alexander of the NSA was on 60 Minutes 3 weeks ago, and he said, just in an off-the-cuff remark, he said, several foreign nations have the capacity to bring down our economy. And as I showed in my previous book, Secret Weapon, they have the motive, the means, and the opportunity. Forbes said, if we caught on to what he said, the stock market should fall sharply on Monday. From December 15th to the end of the year, it rose 5%.
What's going on? I think this is put all of the money. It's like a gaming system where they're just putting everybody's money on the table and then wiping it off, putting more money on the table and wiping it off. I mean, we are being bled dry.
The IMF just put out a report that said the only way that Western nations can get out of debt is to confiscate wealth.
Okay, explain this. I sent this to my wife just the other day when it came out, and I said, honey, it's exactly what I've been talking about. And people have a hard time accepting this. This is what happened in Greece, and now the IMF is saying it's coming all throughout the West. Explain it.
Essentially, when the government gets so deeply in debt as we are now, and no one will buy our debt, and I just saw Puerto Rico has something like $50 billion of debt, $50,000 for every man, woman, and child in Puerto Rico. That was in Forbes this week. When we get that deeply in debt, the government's only opportunity, they can't tax all of it, so what they do is they show up and they confiscate a portion of it. You have a savings account and you've got $500,000. They say the bank has failed and anything over $250,000 is going to have to be taken.
Right.
And they just take it.
And they're saying that they become the good guy by saying, it's the FDIC, we only promised $250.
That's right. We're saving the bank.
Right. But we're saving the bank, and they're taking it, and they actually went in and just seized all of the money in Greece. People don't think that it could happen here. What are the signs that we should be looking? Do you think this is coming? Imminent?
There's no doubt it's coming. If you go back in history, Vladimir Putin talked about the breaking the dollar, for example, and his Panarin, his Russian studies professor who was with him in the KGB, said, the dollar is going to disappear.
Is this the same guy who said we break up into 5 separate?
Yes, same guy.
He's a spooky dude.
Yeah, and I think it's planned. China has said we have to de-Americanize the world.
Yeah.
And so all the nations have lined up against us. I think they're just waiting for when it's beneficial to them, number one, and number two, when it could fly under the radar so we don't launch nuclear missiles in response.
Who is the most likely culprit?
Well, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Some of these nations don't have the economic wherewithal to bring us down economically, but they could use means like cyber means.
If we go down,
Syria.
If we go down, doesn't the rest of the world go down?
Not necessarily. If you call for a de-Americanized world, you start putting in place plans to remove your dependence on the United States. And we're so arrogant to believe that we will always be important.
You know what? All of the safeguards that people told me when I said this in 2006, Everybody said, no, China needs us, and they'll never stop buying our bonds because they need us to consume. It just came out this year, they don't need us to consume anymore. We have lost that position as the world's consumer. They have to keep buying our bonds. They haven't bought our bonds. They're not buying them. The Fed is buying them. So all of the lies all of the things that they said, because of these things, this is not possible. The rest of the world needs us. All of those conditions have failed now.
Yes, and they were true at one point. They're not true today. True now. So what are the Chinese buying? They're buying gold, as are the Russians.
Okay. So when we come back, because I'm actually thrilled that finally somebody comes on the show and doesn't just have the problem, says, and here's a solution for you. We'll go there next. On tomorrow's radio program, I'm going to be telling you, if you remember, we talked about the word rehypothecation. And when you heard that word being used, you'd know there's real trouble. And then we told you a story about Germany demanding their gold back. And the Fed said, hey, we're going to give you a portion of the gold back. They just returned it over the holiday. Tomorrow, you'll hear how it was returned. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I will explain it, what I think it means, on tomorrow's broadcast. Okay. You not only set up a really good case that people have the motive and the means to be able to take us down economically.
And the opportunity.
I think we are being sabotaged by 100 different people that want to take us down in every way, from global warming to the Fed, printing us out of or into oblivion. But you lay out some ways to actually try to lessen the blow on you. Explain. Give me some of them.
Well, I put a list, and I've got it starting on page 220 of the book. Step one is we need to realize we're in a global war. And it's an economic war. Mm-hmm. We knew we were in a Cold War, and we responded appropriately. We act as if all our enemies, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies are seeing as a battle space. Mm-hmm. So we have to recognize the global war is underway. That's the first thing. Second thing is we need to take reasonable precautions. Our markets have been opened, as I discussed in the first book, Secret Weapon, to naked short selling and credit default swaps and things that are so complex that should never be allowed.
Kevin, do you believe that? I mean, this part of any conversation is so frustrating to me, because I don't think that there's anybody in government or anybody way high up that is going to. They're not going to move. They're not going to move that fast. You'll never get that done. I'm looking at. That's what I would do if I were trying to save the country, but I don't know if enough people are really trying to save the country.
And most of them don't even understand it.
Yeah.
When I've been in Congress, they said, write what you're telling me at an 8th grade level and give it to me.
Right. So then you had step 3, which is stop money printing, which is not going to happen.
We got to get money moving without money printing, which and the way that you would do that is you'd actually reduce regulation. You'd let kids open lemonade stands all the way up. You'd reduce the regulation, and you get people to hire. You'd repeal Obamacare. Those are the things that would do. But I can see your point.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to.
I'd love this to happen.
It's practical and it's right.
Right.
But it's hard.
Step 4 is achieve
energy independence.
And we could do it. We could do it, and it would be easy. It would be easy.
Yeah, there's a political solution required.
Reduce regulation, which we're going the opposite direction.
That's correct, unfortunately.
Okay. Workable tax code, which
that one's important because we have trillions of dollars in foreign corporations overseas. John Chambers at Cisco says, I'll bring it back tomorrow and start hiring people if you will let me bring it back without paying punitive taxes.
Correct. Okay, we have about 2.5 minutes, and I want to focus on steps 7 and 8 real quick.
Okay.
First one is teach America what it's all about.
That's right. And that's what you're doing. And if people grab and see our uniqueness in history and how God established this country and all of the things that make us special, then people will realize that we've got to maintain that special standard.
Okay. And the last one is return to our spiritual roots.
See, in the end, you may be right. Everything could be stripped from us economically. But if our treasure is not in money and not in our monetary system, we will survive, thrive, and come back.
I will tell you that do we have the clip from today's Liberty Treehouse? Real quick, play this. Watch this. I said this about 3 hours ago before we we're going to do the show. In an interview.
So what's the next 5-0 of GB's life going to look like?
Much different than this one. This one, I am starting out, or at least this decade, I'm starting out the closest to what I came into this world with, and that is the right attitude. I've got like 5 huge pages of small print of goals for the company, but I have 2 pages of goals just for me, and they're all about be a better man. They're not about money or business or anything else. Just be a better friend. In this special, we were talking, and I said, if we lose everything, it's okay as long as we know who's in charge and that we have each other.
That's right.
And that we know what's important. There's no doubt, is there any doubt in your mind, if we know that, we win?
We not only win, but if we cry out to God, we repent of our hedonism and everything else, and we invite the Holy Spirit to come and move through this earth, we won't only win, we will overcome and be extraordinarily victorious. There'll be a massive revival. It would change the nature and the face of the world.
Talked to somebody from China, and they said people in China are actually praying for America to be humbled. And I said, thank you very much. And they said they see it over there as the only way the United States will regain its footing is to be seriously humbled. And I have a feeling the humbling is about to begin.
We gained the whole world. We lost our soul. What do we have?
What do we have? Nothing. The name of the book is Game Plan. I don't know if you've ever seen Kevin before, but he gets it like so very few get it. Pick it up. It's available everywhere, and we'll have you back on the show again soon. Thank you, sir.
God bless
you.
Our guest today is Kevin Freeman, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Anyone who can deal with Frank Gaffney can certainly deal with us, I would assume. And he is a leading expert on economic warfare and financial terrorism. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Freeman Global Investment Council. His background includes a decade-long tenure with the Templeton Organization, having been personally hired by Sir John Templeton to help build the Templeton Private Client Group, which managed nearly $2.5 billion in global market funds. So your money should be somewhat of interest to you, and certainly he can help you with that funding. His previous book, which we did also feature here, and he may mention as well, is Secret Weapon, How the Economic Terrorism Brought Down the U.S. Stock Market and Why It Can Happen Again, as well as his current book, Game Plan, How to Protect Yourself from the Coming Cyber Economic Attack. Please join me in welcoming our friend Kevin Freeman. Kevin?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity for another book event at Heritage. It's always a pleasure to be at the Heritage Foundation because of the passion and the excellence pursued on behalf of conservatism and the founding principles of the United States. Sadly, as most of you are all too aware, the principles and ideals of America are under direct assault, both from enemies foreign and enemies domestic. Our way of life is extremely fragile at this juncture, primarily, I believe, because we have abandoned core truth. The last time we faced such threats was in the malaise of the 1970s when I was attending high school, and people questioned the role of America in the world and wondered whether or not our system even deserved consideration for continuing. I remember those days well, graduating from high school into a world where Americans were held hostage in Tehran, the stock market was miserable, unemployment was a serious problem, and gold prices were at all-time highs. On the surface, things today seem very different. It seems superior in every way to the 70s. The revolution today is not in Tehran but in Ukraine, and we're hopeful that that is a freedom-loving revolution. When I graduated, the Ukraine was under the control of the Soviet Union, and now there is a freedom movement emerging. Today, the stock market is at all-time highs, the unemployment rate has been dropping, and gold is far from its peak. Yet anyone with a sense of history understands that the good news is in large part an illusion.
Beneath the surface of the glowingly reported statistics is the kind of rot and disease that we experienced 35 years ago. In fact, it may well be far worse. Now, I could discuss the specifics of these items and many others, but I'm certain that those in the audience and people online probably have a much keener insight than I do into the nuances of all of those threats that I'm mentioning. Today, the overarching issue is the systemic fabric of the American economy, and that's the issue which I'm going to share with you. I believe that our economy is the target of our enemies, and I believe that there are precisely specific things we should be doing about it. Such is the basis for my new book, Game Plan, which John mentioned, and it was also the basis for Secret Weapon, which he also mentioned, and that's the sequel. To begin, I need to back up and probably tell you a little bit about me and why I've been so active over the past half-decade or so, researching and reporting on the issues of financial terrorism and more broadly economic warfare. I am by training and in practice an investment manager. I hold the CFA designation, which means Chartered Financial Analyst, and I had firsthand experience working with and for the legendary investor Sir John Marks Templeton. Most of my career I have lived, ate, and drank the stock market. So in 2008, when things began to fall apart, with the rapid-fire failure of Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and near-death experiences at Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, Citigroup, Merrill Lynch, and others across the globe. Remember that? You would go to bed on a Friday night and wake up on a Monday morning, so to speak, and notice that there was another bank that had changed names and changed hands. It's a frightening time. All of that started in the fall of 2007 when we first saw cracks in the housing market and rapidly climbing oil prices, and they began to take their toll. Now, in my career, I've been through a lot. I've been through 2 Gulf Wars, the crash of '87, the NASDAQ tech wreck, 9/11. I've been investing since 1983 professionally. But there was something very different that took place in the year 2008. For one thing, it was an election year, and it was the first election year we'd had in nearly 3 decades without a Bush or a Clinton somewhere on the ballot. So that made it different. In economic terms, other than a very select group of very prescient individuals who later made gobs of money shorting stocks, no one really had an idea of what we were entering into in 2008. In fact, if you looked at the Federal Reserve minutes recently, and they were just released, the minutes at the time, they thought we'd even avoid a recession, let alone enter possibly the next Great Depression. Looking at the expectation was that we would get past the Lehman Brothers failure and all would be well. Well, I didn't know exactly what was going on. I did at least know that something very out of the ordinary was taking place, and I studied it. And eventually I was hired by the Pentagon to look into the issues of economic warfare. And what I uncovered was nothing short of terrifying. The reality is that for some time, the doctrine of our enemies has not been to confront our military, at least not directly. Instead, our enemies have developed what is best termed cyber-economic warfare. We know this from captured al-Qaeda documents, KGB strategy, Chinese PLA writings, and a host of other evidence. This is absolutely, undeniably true. And John, when you said, turn your cell phone off, I was actually looking at an article that is on Reuters today where the president of China says, I'm going to take over internet security for my nation, both offensive and defensive. And they're developing offensive capabilities. Our enemies have determined that the greatest point of vulnerability in the superpower of the United States, the Achilles heel of our pending Greek tragedy, is what we often perceive to be our greatest strength, our economic system. I know this. I've studied thousands of documents that point to an inescapable conclusion. We are facing the Third World War, and it is in fact underway even now. This is a global cyber-economic war. Most every nation on the planet is participating, and we are not exempt. Worse still, it has sovereignty-ending potential, even for our great nation. The war could destroy our very way of life. It could take the lives of many Americans, and yet we are less prepared today than we were before Pearl Harbor in 1941. And I'll add something that's not in my written notes. What we're facing is a potential Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima combined into a single event. That's how serious it is. Unfortunately, our enemies have been preparing. The Russians under Vladimir Putin have been building institutions and coalitions to undermine the dollar. And of course, there are a very active group of state-sponsored hackers and funding of environmental groups to oppose fracking both here and in Europe. This is in addition to outright dumping of U.S. agency bonds in 2008 and follows an economic warfare approach outlined by the KGB and admitted by Soviet defectors. The Chinese have developed the doctrine of unrestricted warfare. I've got a copy of the book. It was explained in this book. This is the English language translation based on a CIA translation published in Panama. But it was published by the People's Liberation Army, written by two senior colonels. It identifies stock market crashes, currency manipulation, cyber hacking, and even EMP weapons as instruments of war that could be used against the United States. Al-Qaeda has insisted that hitting the U.S. economy through all possible means is their top priority. Their timeline. There was a timeline. Fuad Hussein, who is a Pakistani journalist, went in 2005 and says, so what are you up to in Al-Qaeda? And they produced a timeline of events. It's held in, U.S. intelligence has copies of it. It was actually published. And in that, it mentions interesting things like, in the year 2010, we intend to start uprisings in the Arab nations to remove dictators. Popular uprisings, democratic uprisings, with the idea that we can replace them with Islamists. That's exactly, precisely what we saw in the year 2010. So the timeline found in 2005 has a little bit of credibility. What did they say beginning in 2013? Disrupting Western oil supplies, cyber attacks on Western nations, and ultimately the goal of destroying the U.S. dollar. The Iranians have also openly admitted to hacking into our banking system and financial services. In fact, the Iranian Supreme Commander is building an extensive cyber army. He's promised the use of secret weapons against our economy, and he's pursued the development of EMP capabilities. The Fars News Agency had the Supreme Commander addressing a group of students and says, "You're the future cyber army of our nation." The North Koreans have built substantial operations to counterfeit our currency and launder money. They also have developed EMP weapons. While many in our defense and intelligence establishment would like to ignore or dismiss these threats, the truth is they are very serious. General Keith Alexander, outgoing head of the NSA and Cyber Command, admitted this to be the case. In an appearance on 60 Minutes this past December 15th, he said, on national television, a foreign nation could impact and destroy a major portion of our financial system and literally take down the U.S. economy. They could do it. Deborah Plunkett, another NSA official, reiterated the point to CBS, "Don't be fooled," she said. "There are absolutely nation states who have the capability and the intention to do just that, literally take down the U.S. economy." Now, I've got to tell you something. I would add something to General Alexander's comments. If they're available to nation states, they're available to terror groups as well, because these are cyber means in large part. So, the conclusion of my 2009 report for the Pentagon, I was hired in late 2008 and early 2009, and I wrote a report and submitted it in June of 2009 titled Economic Warfare Risks and Responses. And I concluded that we were in the midst of an economic war. 2 phases had happened and another phase was coming. At least 3 additional Pentagon studies and a couple of DoD-sponsored war games have supported those conclusions. In fact, I met with a gentleman yesterday. He's seen the classified reports that were done at the Office of Net Assessment that was called for by Congressman Thornberry and the HASC. They demanded that Net Assessment produce a report. They produced it. It's classified, but I have a general sense. I participated and gave a lot of testimony in it. I have a general sense that it concluded, yes, this is right. In addition, not just from the Defense Department, we have former Treasury Department official Juan Zarate, who wrote a book last year titled Treasury's War. Here's what he says. He said, the United States faces unique systemic vulnerabilities and internal weaknesses that adversaries in the coming financial wars could exploit. The blending of financial and cyber warfare represents the new frontier, he continues, and the United States is uniquely vulnerable and unprepared to defend itself from looming external threats and internal vulnerabilities. He went on to say that both enemies and allies are openly questioning the shelf life of U.S. economic predominance and the utility of an American-led capitalist system. Now, the reason I emphasize that is because one in the Treasury Department was tasked by our government to use financial means to attack our enemies. He's gone after Al-Qaeda, he's gone after rogue regimes, and he was using those weapons. And he is the expert seeing it done to others, has said we're uniquely vulnerable to have it done to us. He also goes on to say these financial wars are coming. They will have a cyber component. It is going to happen. Now, the answer that everybody gives me at this point, oh, come on, Kevin, the Chinese would never hurt our system. They depend on us. We buy all their exports. And so I'm going to diverge from the notes just to tell you a couple of things. Number one, the Chinese are rapidly moving away from being an export-driven economy. They're moving to being a consumer-driven economy. That's their 5-year plan. I don't know how successful they'll be. In fact, they seem to be botching it a little bit right now. But the point is the Chinese make their mind up and they're going to have a one-child policy. They have a one-child policy. Doesn't matter if they kill all the baby girls. That's their one-child policy, and that's what they've done. They have a policy now. We want to stop exporting. And they're openly questioning, just as Juan said, the shelf life of American economic predominance and the utility of an American-led capitalist system. So the idea that they depend on us and need us so badly, they're questioning that. Like General Alexander's admission, this one from Zarate is extremely significant. We arrogantly assume that the rest of the world needs our economy in place. That is the most oft-stated objection to the idea that we could be in a global economic war. But while the world may once have been fully supportive of American economic strength, the truth is that the world is preparing direct and ongoing challenges to that strength. The state news agency in Beijing called for a de-Americanized world last September. Polls across the world show that the number one threat to world peace in the minds of non-Americans is the United States of America. The official journal of the Communist Party has gone so far to state that Chinese holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds should be deemed a weapon rather than an asset. To naively put our head in the sand and ignore this view would be foolish. Which brings me to Game Plan, How to Protect Ourselves from the Coming Cyber Economic Attack. I wrote the book because we are in an economic war, and the stakes are much higher than most of us can imagine. The book expands upon and updates my Pentagon research and secret weapon, and it distills the essence of my concerns to a few critical points, which I'll share with you. First, it's imperative that we understand the areas in which we are most vulnerable. And I'll list 4 of them today. One of them is energy and the electric grid. The second one is the financial markets. The third one is our currency. And the fourth one is our cyber dependence. Each of those 4 areas has the potential to severely impact our nation, and they're all intertwined. Yet each has been systematically ignored or overlooked in one way or another. In terms of energy and the electric grid, we have direct evidence of purposed attacks, both historic and recent. Do you know how dependent we are on energy and the lights being on? Do you consider it an attack on America's energy supply when the Arab nations called for an oil embargo in the 70s? Of course it was. Or how about Al-Qaeda demanding a new embargo and threatening to torch Arab oil fields or to close the Hormuz Strait? Other threats to our energy supply are subtler. We have evidence of the Middle Eastern and Russian efforts to fund and promote an environmental movement in the U.S. and in Europe in an attempt to derail fracking. This isn't trivial. Just 2 years ago, the Department of Interior looked at the possibility of taking a 2-inch lizard called the sand dune lizard and declaring it an endangered species. Which sounds like a simple thing, a stroke of the pen from the Department of Interior, but you know what that would have meant? A potential 2 million barrels of oil a day produced in the Permian Basin of West Texas off limits overnight. We found evidence that some of the effort was funded by Vladimir Putin. It should be clear that all of OPEC and Russia would prefer that our nation not become energy secure. You may have seen this. There was a Matt Damon anti-fracking film produced by the United Arab Emirates. Please note, I'm using the term energy secure rather than energy independent. We need energy security, not energy independence. That's a result of time I spent recently with General James Conway, the former Commandant of the Marine Corps, who's now working with SAFE, Securing America's Energy Future. And General Conway pointed out to me that in a global market, even nations like Canada and Norway, which are net exporters of oil, are not energy independent. They're energy secure, meaning that they always pay a global price for oil, but they're not hostages to a cutoff in supply. So the goal is energy security rather than energy independence. Then there are more direct threats to our energy supply and electric grid, such as the terror attack on a San Jose area substation last year. You probably all heard that. That made the big news. It made the big news last month. The attack happened last year in the spring. Critical communication lines were cut, and AK-47s were used to shoot up transformers and almost blacked out all of Silicon Valley. It was a planned terrorist attack. And unfortunately, we've labeled it vandalism. You know, this wasn't spray cans spraying on the transformers. This is AK-47s shooting them up. And it was overlooked until a Senate report called out the truth. Of course, the ultimate attack against our energy infrastructure would be the dreaded electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. Now, that also has come in the news. Justice with Judge Janine has done shows on it, and Frank Gaffney, who I work with at the Center for Security Policy, has led a really good team of fabulous engineers and others to point out we're very vulnerable in this area. The science is undeniable. In fact, we've known about the science since the 1940s when we were trying high-altitude nuclear testing, and we noticed we were blacking out islands in the Pacific. And so, where'd the power go? A relatively low-yield and crude nuclear device, roughly akin to what we had in 1945, exploded over the continental United States without any real precision, could wipe out our electric grid for a decade or more. It could send our nation back 100 years, causing mayhem, disease, and death. The Chinese PLA has declared this is their ultimate weapon. North Korea has the capability. And in fact, we intercepted a North Korean tramp steamer in Panama last summer with nuclear-capable surface-to-air missiles on board. Iran has directly challenged our Navy. They've moved ships within range that could launch an EMP. In private treaty negotiations, the Russians have boasted. You Americans are so arrogant. Don't you know we could wipe out your power grid? They've boasted of the ability to destroy our power grid. And yet, despite the fact that we know this, and we know how to protect our grid, and we know how to otherwise mitigate the EMP threat at a reasonable cost, we have yet to do so. This is by itself evidence that we are in denial. The second serious vulnerability is our financial markets. In 2008, another Great Depression nearly began because of things like credit default swaps, collateralized mortgage obligations, and naked short selling. Three things the average American knows nothing about. They almost took us to a Great Depression. That's why the authors of Unrestricted Warfare declared that financial warfare would be the most significant form of warfare in the 21st century. They wrote that in 1999. They pointed to disruptions of entire economies through the manipulation and subversion of financial markets using little understood but well-established techniques. And they named George Soros in this book. They said, who could say George Soros is not a financial terrorist based on his for-profit intentions of manipulating, well, I don't want to say the term manipulating markets, although he was convicted of insider trading in France. What I will say is Mr. Soros knows full well how to push the buttons on the financial markets to achieve certain outcomes. The primary argument against the possibility of financial market manipulation has been, number one, the markets are too large to manipulate. But that was before we had proof of manipulation in LIBOR, which is the London Interbank Offer Rate, which was manipulated by a few banks to the tune of multiple trillions of dollars. Or the flash crash in 2010 when the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell almost 1,000 points in a matter of minutes. We also have evidence of manipulation in Hong Kong, in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 1999, a place I visited just before the Chinese takeover. We have evidence of stolen trading in 1998, the manipulation. We also have evidence of stolen trading algorithms from major Wall Street firms. Imagine this. A rogue employee goes into a Wall Street firm. Let's see if I can pull one out. slides one of these little flash drives into the computers, downloads the algorithmic trading codes, and walks out the door. That did actually happen. Sergei Alindikov was caught. He apparently uploaded the information to a server in Germany. He was caught, arrested, tried, convicted, and then his conviction was overturned. Nevertheless, it shows the point of vulnerability. Last year, we had a Twitter flash crash. I don't know if you heard about this. You probably didn't notice. It happened in just a few seconds. The Syrian Electronic Army hacked the Associated Press Twitter feed and tweeted out, "The White House has been hit." People could walk out the door here in Washington and say, "No, it hasn't. There's no sirens. Nothing's going on." But the trading computers in Wall Street didn't know it wasn't true. They saw this, and instantly they dropped the Dow 1% in a second. That was a mere taste of what's coming. Like the possibility of an EMP or energy attack, this threat must not be overlooked or understated. Our economy depends on functioning capital markets. Without them, we collapse. This was underscored by Congressman Paul Kanjorski, Democrat from Pennsylvania, who was the head of the Capital Markets Subcommittee at the time, the chair. He was in a C-SPAN interview regarding the 2008 panic. It's worth seeing. You should Google it, and you can find it on YouTube. He said, on September 15th, I think it was, about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Federal Reserve noticed a tremendous drawdown in the money market accounts of the United States to the tune of about $500 billion. He said they calculated and said that if we don't stop this, by the end of the day, the entire economy would implode, and by the next day, the U.S. government might cease to function. That's how serious it was. So, that electronic run on the banks, have we done something to prevent that from happening? Well, made a few regulatory changes. I don't think that we have fully safeguarded our markets. The third vulnerability that we have is the dollar as reserve currency. At present, our federal government has direct indebtedness of almost $18 trillion, up from around $10 trillion little more than 5 years ago. Yet we're paying on average less than 2.5% interest to service this debt annually. That's about $400 billion a year. What if the interest rate shot to the levels that Spain and Italy experienced recently when their economy was called into question? The interest cost would be about $1.5 trillion, eating up half of our tax revenue. What if interest rates went back to the peak levels of our lifetime? That would require somewhere between 75% and 100% of our tax revenue. If we struggled to fund the military today, just imagine what would happen if our interest costs rose by $1 trillion or more per year. The primary reason that we pay 2.5% to borrow money instead of 5% or higher is the fact that our currency is the primary reserve currency of the world. When other nations conduct trade, they do so in dollars. When a barrel of oil is sold, it's sold in dollars. When nations have extra money, they hold it in dollars. This special relationship has kept our interest rates lower than they would have been and allowed us to continually expand our debt with few consequences. The dollar's privileged status has not gone unnoticed. The Chinese PLA, and yes, even members of the Communist Party and Central Bank, have been very vocal that the dollar is going to lose its status. When the Treasury Secretary Geithner was asked about dollar stability by students at Peking University, he told them that if the dollar was sound and would retain its reserve status for decades. The students broke out laughing. A former chief economist of the World Bank just last month, who is also a professor at Peking University in Beijing, declared that China must move against the dollar. He said that it is a threat to the world economy. The Chinese sold more of their treasury holdings in December of last year than any month in history. They also added more to their gold reserves last year than any year prior. The Russians under Putin have likewise called for an end to the dollar's reign. Interestingly, this has been a long-term strategy for Putin and dates back to Igor Panarin, a former KGB buddy of Putin, who in 1998 went into a conference in Linz, Austria, looked at the audience of 400 delegates and said to them that the dollar was going to collapse under its own weight, that the U.S. economy is a pyramid scheme, and that China and Russia should work to replace the dollar and could take over control of the global financial system. Now that seemed in 1998 like a pipe dream. and ridiculous. We were on our path to paying down the debt. But in 2008, according to Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, the Russians approached the Chinese with a plan to dump combined holdings of American debt and ultimately bankrupt us. The Russians did dump tens of billions of dollars worth of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac holdings. The Chinese did not. It's my belief they simply weren't prepared for the blowback at the time. Our own DoD-sponsored financial war games found conclusively that if the Russians and Chinese did work together to replace the dollar, they could succeed and over time emerge stronger as a result, just as Panarin projected. This is recapped in Jim Rickard's book, Currency Wars. This is not a threat we can afford to ignore. Even Al-Qaeda had destruction of the dollar as one of their top priorities. They know that without the dollar as reserve currency, our military is neutered. Just last night, it's on CNBC Now, a reported survey of 200 institutional money managers found that 53% believe the dollar will lose its reserve currency status to the Chinese renminbi. This view was shared by senior officials at the European Central Bank as well. Americans are about the only group that doesn't seem to understand this risk. Last but not least, I've covered 3. Number 4 is the cyber threat. This can actually be a force multiplier for attacks in the other 3 areas. For example, a cyber attack could take down the electric grid, or it could disrupt financial and currency markets. By now, everyone knows that Target was hacked using code available to both criminal and terror networks. We also know how the Stuxnet virus targeted Iranian nuclear development. The Navy systems have been compromised, as has the White House, the Federal Reserve, the stock exchanges, and pretty nearly every system in our country. Attacks are measured in the millions per day. Iran and North Korea are developing cyber hacking teams in addition to the Russians and Chinese. The most frightening part is that we're virtually defenseless in these areas and our enemies know it. Consider this quote from Unrestricted Warfare regarding how to destroy a superpower, written in 1999. However, by using the combination method, a completely different scenario and game can occur. They said basically an inferior opponent can't beat a superior opponent unless they use the combination method. And that is, the attacking side must muster large amounts of capital and launch a sneak attack against financial markets. Then after causing a financial crisis, bury a computer virus and hacker detachment in the opponent's computer system, while at the same time carrying out a network attack against the enemy so the civilian electricity network, traffic dispatching network, financial transaction network, telephone communications, and mass media are completely paralyzed. This will cause the enemy nation to collapse, falling into social panic, street riots, and a political crisis. That's how you defeat a superpower like the United States. This is the doctrine of our enemies. So what can we do about it? That's the second section of my book game plan, wherein I identify each of the threats and how investors and individuals can and should respond. The book explains how the threats could manifest, what signs to look for, and how to protect your personal finances. For example, if the dollar were to collapse, what should you do with your investments? What about hyperinflation or deflation? Is there any personal preparedness we could do that would help in an extended power outage? The second section of the book, Game Plan, is a very practical how-to approach. Should you own stocks, gold, bonds, real estate? The truth is, it all depends on the type of risk we face. That's why I titled the book Game Plan. In a football game, you don't know if they're going to run or pass. If they run, you have to have a run defense. If they pass, you need a pass defense. Teams have game plans flexible enough to adapt in response to the type of attack. I travel and speak a lot. And whenever I travel and speak, the practical aspect is the topic that draws the most interest. The reality is that most Americans intuitively understand that the world's gone a little bit crazy and their well-being has been targeted. People are worried about their 401k, their retirement plan, their savings account. And unfortunately, most stockbrokers, financial planners, investment advisors don't really know how to address their concerns. So they'll come in and they'll say, I want to buy a bunch of gold. And the financial planner will say, why do you want to buy a bunch of gold? It's a barbaric relic. I want to buy a bunch of gold, and I want to put all my assets in gold. And if they'd done that when gold was $1,950 an ounce, they'd be sitting with a third loss, 30% loss. And the financial advisor says, I told you should go in the stock market, which has gone up dramatically during that period. Stockbrokers, financial advisors can tell you about asset allocation, dollar cost averaging, and the efficient frontier. But few have been trained in what to do with a Twitter flash crash or a dollar collapse. That's why I started a project at the Keating Center for Capitalism, Free Enterprise, and Constitutional Liberty, named after Frank Keating, current head of the American Bankers Association and former governor of Oklahoma. It's at Oklahoma Wesleyan University in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and it's called the NSIC Institute. NSIC stands for National Security Investment Consultant, and our purpose is to train and credential investment professionals with the knowledge base to protect their clients. In a meeting, I ask attendees, how many here have a financial planner who understands economic warfare? I never see hands. Then I ask, how many wish they had a financial planner who understood economic warfare? And generally every hand goes up. If you're an investment professional and you want to gain this credential, or if you're someone who wants a trained advisor, check out www.nsic.org. The project's just launching, but I believe it's going to have a great impact on protecting clients and also protecting America. Just imagine if we could get 1,000 trained advisors and each one represented $50 million of client assets. That would be $50 billion of trained, informed money. Not just protected for itself, but also looking for projects to invest to protect America. Now, the third section of my book discusses broader approaches that we as a nation could undertake to enhance our economic security. Obviously, sitting in Heritage Foundation, I think I should talk about slowing the growth of our debt. But that's accompanied with suggestions for another good heritage idea, repatriating corporate earnings held overseas, tax code simplification, and reducing regulation in many areas, while increasing it, in my opinion, in a few areas. Why in the world should a 10-year-old girl wanting to sell lemonade be restricted, but major Wall Street banks were able to trade credit default swaps with impunity? The final section and the appendix of Game Plan offers hope, and that hope does not come from political solutions. Up to this point, we've discussed what I believe are two legs of the famous Reagan three-legged stool in the form of the economy and national defense. What I think we have proven is that a strong defense depends on a strong economy and vice versa. But that's a two-legged stool. Both defense and the economy also depend on moral authority and an honorable system. And those things, I believe, ultimately come from God. The third leg of the Reagan stool is based on Judeo-Christian values. Now, I know the debate in society today is whether or not you have to check your deeply held religious beliefs at the door when you engage in commerce. Do I have to deny what I believe in my heart, what the Bible teaches me, in order to be able to sell my goods and wares in the United States? That was debated in Arizona yesterday. I'm a devoted Christian. Regardless of what society thinks, it's recorded in Mark 8:38 that if we are ashamed of him before men, that he will be ashamed of us before the Heavenly Father. My deeply held political or personal beliefs require me to say, I'm not ashamed of Jesus. President Reagan said that if we ever forget we are one nation under God, we will be one nation gone under. So when I look at the economic warfare issue through the lens of Scripture, I see some critical points, and I think they're necessary to share, and I shared them in the book thanks to my publisher, Regnery. Number one, our indebtedness is a sign of a nation under a curse. I read the Bible, I believe it. Deuteronomy chapters 28 and 29 teach that a nation under blessing lends to other nations and doesn't have to borrow. A nation under a curse is dependent on other nations and has to borrow. Proverbs 22:7 says a borrower is a slave to the lender. That's the first point. The second point is I believe we're under a curse because we've chosen money over God. The Deuteronomy passage is about a choice. I lay before you a choice, life or death, blessing or curse. Choose you this day. Matthew 6:24 says you can't serve two masters. You're going to love one and hate the other, or hate one and love the other. You can't serve both God and money. I believe America has chosen money. We love it, and as a result, we're seeing a growing hatred toward God. The third point, unfortunately, the love of money is the root of all sorts of evils, according to 1 Timothy 6:10. I'm not against money, My career has been helping people invest to grow and preserve their wealth. But when money becomes the master, we've got problems. The fourth point, we've put our treasure in our bank accounts, our 401ks, our savings. That's why we're so vulnerable to economic attack. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If you want to kill America's heart, you kill our economy. That's why they wrote the book. Our treasure's in our economy. The fifth point, Jesus also provides the answer. Wisdom from 2,000 years ago. I'm going to adapt it a little bit, Jesus. It still applies today. It says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal and hackers break in and hack. Instead, store up for yourself treasure in heaven. How do we do that? We stand on the Word of God and we live rightly according to it. I got a call from Gunnar Johnson. Gunnar is the stewardship pastor at Gateway Church, one of the largest churches in America. He called me because he read my book, Secret Weapon and Game Plan, and he wanted to put them in the church library. I said, you want to put books on financial terrorism in the church library? He said, yes, because really I believe your message is about stewardship and priorities. And I think he's right. There's a whole section in the book on that. You can't protect your wealth from economic attack unless you know what your wealth truly should be about. Now I have two more thoughts before I conclude. The first is that because we're a nation that's turned away from God, and I truly believe we have, our problem isn't really national security or economics. This is a heart problem. It's a spiritual problem. And the only solution for a spiritual problem must be a spiritual answer. And I said this directly in the book. I've said it in the Naval War College, and I've said it at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I've said it in the Pentagon, and I've said it just about everywhere I go. It's a spiritual problem. It's found in 2 Chronicles 7:14. That's the answer. It was God's answer. Solomon said, hey, I built this temple, God, but when my people, your people, mess up, and we will, what do we do about it? And God answered him in a dream, and this is what he told Solomon. If my people who are called by my name, and for me that's the believing body of Christ, that's Christians. We're responsible. We're the ones that have committed the heart problem. The world, they value money. They should. That's what the world does. Christians should value God and put Him first. If my people called by my name will humble themselves and pray. This town is not a humble town. I come in here and the arrogance is just astronomical. It reminds me of something John Ashcroft shared when he was... His father had come. He'd just been elected to the Senate. They were standing around praying for him. His father was seated in the couch, and he tried to get out of the couch to push his way out of the couch to pray for John. He said, Dad, you don't have to struggle to stand to pray for me. And his father said, Son, I'm not struggling to stand. I'm struggling to kneel. The spirit of Washington is arrogance. The spirit of Christ is humility. And if you're a senator here and later attorney general, you'll struggle to kneel too. Because it's a spirit of arrogance. That night, Dr. Ashcroft passed away. By the way, that's the last lesson from father to son. So, my people called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face. Too often we seek His hand. Give me favor. Grant me favor. Grant me favor. Grant me blessing. He said, seek my face. And turn from their wicked ways. We like to point out the sin in the world, but we should instead inspect ourselves. God promises, we do those things. He says, I will hear from heaven. I will forgive your sins, and I will heal your land. This means the church must repent of serving two masters. That is how we best win the economic war. We return to God. If we cry out to God, He will, according to Acts, send His Holy Spirit, heal our land, and heal our lives. My last thought is that we need to return to God because I believe with all my heart that God is going to return to us. Jesus said He was coming back. That's something I've held in my life, all my life. It's like, Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. 1988, remember, 88 reasons to expect Christ to return in 1988. For those of you in the room old enough, it swept the country. And then somehow after that, we just decided, well, that was embarrassing. We're going to stop talking. I'm not going to stop talking. Jesus is coming back. I don't know when. The Bible says I won't know when. But I've read the book of the Revelation. It starts with 7 letters to 7 churches from Jesus. In 5 of those letters, Jesus said, repent, by the way. People say repentance is not a New Testament concept. Oh, really? Jesus told 5 of the 7 churches, repent. Why? Because if you don't, I'm coming down there and I'm taking your candle from the lampstand. I don't know what that means exactly, but I don't think it sounds good. The end of the book says Jesus is coming back. I believe this. Is this the hour that we are to least expect it? Now that's the message of Game Plan. We're in a global economic war. There are practical things we can and should do to protect our nation and ourselves. But most importantly, I believe that the body of Christ must get right with God and spread the message of His Son. We can no longer serve 2 masters. God bless you. Thank you. And I pray for God to forgive and bless the United States of America. And I'll take questions.
And we have a microphone. If you would please wait for it so it can be online. And identify yourself as a courtesy would be helpful too.
Thank you so much. My name is Celia. I went to Hillsdale College and I studied economics, and actually my thesis was on bubbles and interest rates. So that's a huge, I love that subject so much. But my question is that I studied the housing bubble immensely. I also studied the student loan bubble. But what I came to the conclusion is that I think our whole economy is a bubble, because I think you're talking about how people go in and manipulate the markets and the economy. Well, I think that the biggest manipulator is the federal government, because they keep pumping fiat money into the banks and into our reserves like nobody's business. And the reason why we haven't seen a bigger crash is because the reserves are holding on to that money, because the reserve rate is higher than the lending rate right now. So I think that the federal government is pumping fiat money into this country to keep our interest rates on the debt low. So I want to know when and how you think those interest rates will start rising if the federal government is manipulating them like that.
Sure. And it goes, first off, let me say I love Hillsdale College. I've been involved and supportive of them for quite some time. In fact, I had a good meeting with Larry Arnn at the Kirby Center just a couple of days ago. President Arnn is a good friend. It's a great school. And the question is a fair question, because truly, QE3, we're going to buy $1 trillion worth of instruments every year, and money is fungible. It will flow to where the path is least resistance, and it goes to the stock market. That's been the path of least resistance. And so the question is about interest rates. As long as they keep buying our debt, what will be the catalyst? The catalyst will be when they are the only buyers of our debt. And that's what happened in a nation called Zimbabwe. In 1998, the Zimbabwe Central Bank, Reserve Bank, was producing $100 bills that you could take to Thomas Cook and you could exchange them for $20 US. This was real money. You could walk in and $100 exchanges for $20. But there was no external buyer of their debt. The only buyer was the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and they continued to buy the debt. And by the year 2008, they were producing $100 trillion bills that weren't worth 1 penny. So, when does that happen? That's when the Federal Reserve is the only buyer of debt and the rest of the world says, we're not playing this Ponzi scheme any longer. That's what Panarin said in 1998, that would ultimately happen, and right now other nations are preparing for it. That is the destruction of the reserve currency, the U.S. dollar. So I recommend and suggest policies. We need to stop and look at this excessive Federal Reserve buying in light of the reality that we're in global economic warfare. If we had all things being equal, which is what economists love to do, if we had all things being equal, we could probably produce $1 trillion platinum coins till the cows come home. And as long as people kept saying a U.S. dollar is always valuable, then we'd be fine. The problem is that all things are not always equal. People do adjust their behavior based on circumstances. And if the friends and enemies of the United States stop purchasing dollar-based assets and stop using dollar-based assets in international commerce, then the chickens will come home to roost and we will see a collapse in our currency. So we need to look at everything from a war footing. We're in a war. and we need to adjust our policies accordingly. We did that in World War II. Once Pearl Harbor happened, we realized we're in a war, so we have to do different things than we did before it happened. And that's the same thing with the global economic war.
Another question?
Josh Shepard here with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for your message. I really appreciate how you integrate your faith as well into that message. In terms of, you're looking at it from a very personal standpoint, obviously, a lot of these issues right now with this book, but I'm curious if you have had some receptivity on Capitol Hill, leaders of either party who have listened to your message, and if you feel there's some efforts underway that are actually addressing these issues either in Congress or at the Pentagon.
We've had very limited success in getting Congress to address these issues, or the Pentagon, mostly because we've siloed the issues so effectively. We don't integrate. We say, this is national defense, and we think of missile systems. And that's what the Chinese said in the book. They said Americans will never get it because we're so caught up in the latest weaponry. And the economists, unfortunately, go on the viewpoint, either they'll go one of two ways. We're doing it to ourselves, we're our worst enemy, or they will say, oh, come on, the world's always going to need the U.S. economy. They never think in the national security terms. So, unfortunately, we've had very limited. Now, I have had good success more recently. They've done 3 Pentagon studies that I'm aware of to look at this. They've all concluded the same thing. I've got a colleague, David, here, who traveled with me. I don't know how many House and Senate offices we've met and how many leaders we've shared with. We've been at the FBI, the DIA, and everybody gets it. The problem is it's not in my lane, is the answer. We've been to the SEC. That's not my job. That belongs over there, maybe. So I feel like, Are You My Mother, book written for children. Why are you the person I'm supposed to talk to about this? There's very limited understanding of the integration of these two issues. It's a shame because this is what Ronald Reagan used to bring down the Soviet Union. National defense and economics combined. So we're making some progress. It's very slow. I'll be at CPAC next week, and I'll be talking about this. And the books and TV interviews and radio interviews and so forth. That's what I'm getting traction on. And I'm getting a few calls. I met with Chief of Staff for 2 of our great congressmen yesterday, and we're getting a little bit of progress. So.
Another question?
David Hemingway. I've traveled the halls of Congress with Kevin endlessly, it seems, and Senator Lieberman really tried to help. Unfortunately, Senator Lieberman is leaving, and Kevin, maybe you would like to tell him what Senator Lieberman tried to do.
Senator Lieberman put into one of I think it was the Dodd-Frank bill, but one of the hot legislative priorities of the Obama administration, he put in just one comment. And they needed Senator Lieberman's vote, that said that economic warfare is the province of the Treasury Department. The White House had the language struck. They didn't want it there. So they asked, where does it belong? Dead silence. It doesn't belong anywhere. Bill Gertz wrote an article in the Washington Times on my research, and he searched around the Pentagon and found that Pentagon officials said it doesn't belong here. Now, he denied it in the article, but that was the scuttlebutt that he got. And the official is currently the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. So I don't know. If it doesn't belong at CIA and DIA and Treasury and SEC, I don't know where it belongs, but it belongs somewhere. Financial warfare is real. It's the Chinese doctrine, and we need to be prepared to respond to it. I have got some hopeful signs recently that one official that heard me speak at a presentation in the Office of Secretary of Defense did pick it up and has funded some additional research into the topic. But it should be, if not the top priority topic, among the top topics. And it's not yet.
Do we have one final question? Yes, sir.
My name is Kyle Roda. I'm just a donor. With the continuing purchases of gold by Russia and China, how do you see gold fitting into replacement as reserve currency or anything along those lines?
And I have a whole chapter on gold. I'm not buy gold and sit in the basement with a shotgun. I have a whole chapter in the book on gold because it has problems too, but it doesn't get expanded at the whim of politicians. Now, it could get expanded at the whim of asteroid miners. If somebody lands on an asteroid, they may find a whole, because we don't know exactly where gold came from, but we think that there's a lot more of it than we know about. And that could really wreak havoc on your monetary system. But for now, it's a better alternative than fiat paper currencies, at least according to the Chinese and the Russians. And there is this scuttlebutt that they're going to back the yuan, both China and Russia, with gold and make it the reserve currency, which is going to be really hard because to have a reserve currency, you have to issue a lot of debt because there's all this liquidity in the world. We have a global liquidity problem, a global currency problem, not just in the United States. But it is possible for single nations to be attacked and confidence to go down. For example, just look at Greece and Cyprus. And when they get under the gun of foreign entities or the IMF or whatever, it can be very detrimental. And again, I'm not saying that we're going to lose the reserve currency status. What I am saying is we've got to be aware of our enemies and their intentions to destroy that. So I personally put in client portfolios, and I mentioned in the book, yeah, you ought to have some gold. And there's a lot of different ways to have it. You can have it in paper gold. You can have it in gold coins. You can have it in gold bullion. You can have it in gold mining stocks. There's a whole different, you can have it in your house. You can have it at a bank. You can have it, a whole host of ways to do it. You can have silver, which is poor man's gold. But the point is that gold is being viewed as our enemies as something worth accumulating. We should take notice. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll steal this. Again, we do have copies available. If you would like to have one and talk further with Kevin, he'll be up here to sign them or out in the lobby. We do thank you for your kind attention and hope to see you again soon at another Heritage event. Thank you. And thank you.